CDR 30 team. For those of you who might be turning in for the first time, this is the very first time that carbon dioxide removal has had a presence in the Blue Zone, and that is due to the Herculean efforts of the negative emissions platform and the many, many different CDR organizations and companies that really threw in to make this work. And in spite of the extraordinary heat, you'll probably see me melting at some point within the next 30 minutes. It's been a very successful COP so far, particularly at this pavilion. My name is Chris Neidl. I am the carbon dioxide removal lead for the Climate High-Level Champions. And in that capacity, I have been working very closely for many, many months now with the Brazilian presidency in the delivery and the development of the action agenda for COP30. And in addition to the historic first of having a pavilion here in the Blue Zone related to CDR, this is also the first time at any COP that carbon dioxide removal has been incorporated into the action agenda formally in two different initiatives. And I'll reference the other one later on in my conversation. But one of them, which we're incredibly excited about, will be really the sort of underlying theme or foundation of our program this morning for the next few hours. And that is what we're calling a Mutirão for carbon removals, which I'll explain what that means in a moment. And our panels today are going to all sort of reflect or really do deeper dives into some of the aspects of what that initiative actually entails. You'll meet in just a little bit. We have Frederick from the Danish ministry. I always butcher your last name, so you can say it, you probably come up. But this initiative really was the result of the leadership of the Group of Negative Emitters, WBCSD, and many other organizations that were participants in the action agenda. So I really want to thank all of those folks in advance. And again, I'll get into the details of it, but just to kind of set up our first speaker, my good buddy who happened to be actually on the same plane with me, so we got to hang out on the way down here to Belém, is the thrust of this really aligns with what this COP is all about. And this COP, what makes it really distinct in terms of its sort of animating force and call to action, is the focus on urgent, immediate implementation of the solutions that we need to scale up within the next 3 to 5 years. So it was a real explicit rejection of more long-term commitments and targets. It was about, let's roll up our sleeves and do what we have to do right now. The other part of it is the Mutirão part, which is a wonderful trivia interest. You can tell me, I think my Portuguese is okay on that. It's getting there. And this is something I've really fallen in love with, and you'll see it as part of the branding. And this is the idea, well, how are we going to implement? And it's about, it's a colloquial Brazilian term for really collective action, people coming together, rolling up their sleeves, and doing something that would be impossible to do by any single actor. And so what this initiative, which I'll describe again shortly, it took that master theme of the COP30 and said, hey, we need to do that for carbon removal. Anybody who is a participant in carbon removal knows we need to really be implementing right now to have any chance to get to where we need to be according to the IPCC in later decades of this century. And we need to work together. We need to increase the degrees by which governments, industries, and businesses, rather than operating alone, are learning from each other, are talking. We know that that accelerates progress. So you're my focal point. And so what I want to do, we're very, very fortunate. Everybody knows the state of CDR. Let me first give you what we're going to do today. I'll be up here all day. It's a bit of a marathon as your master of ceremonies and moderator. We are going to have 3 discussions starting at 9:30, panels that again reflect really the kind of the core components of the initiative. The first one, incredibly excited that this is the focus of existing industries integrating carbon dioxide removal into their supply chains, into their operations, using their waste streams. And this being a key platform for helping us reach scale both by 2030 and beyond. Then we're going to have Johan Falk is going to join us, and we're going to talk about one other key element of this initiative, which is how do we grow demand for carbon dioxide removal, particularly when it comes to voluntary corporate demand. So integrating CDR into net zero strategies and beginning the journey of purchasing CDR. And that is a key focus of this initiative. And then the last one is really a very, very fun one. So through these collaborative fora with this initiative, The idea is to get new ideas that come up, and again, not having them develop in isolation, but can we do it as a community? And so this is kind of a grab bag of big ideas. So we'll have 4 people up on stage, and we're just going to do a show and tell of 4 very different big ideas that we think each in their own sort of domain and own way, whether it's part of policy or it's part of business models. If we were to start to see the maturation of those in the next 3 to 5 years, these are some of the many keys of unlocking any possibility of reaching the target that we have set for this initiative. But to put us in a good place here to sort of set up a little bit, we're going to have a couple of statements. You're going to hear from Nico in just a second for the State of CDR report, just for a kind of a brief table setting. Oh, sorry. Then I am going to give a little bit more of a kind of a deep dive into what I just described at a high level for about 5 or 6 minutes about the initiative itself. What's up? How you doing? And then we're also excited. Oh, I forgot to move that slide. We're excited to be able to get our friend Frederick from the Group of Negative Emitters. He's just going to quickly come up and say hi. And we're not going to have a policy panel in this session because there's already an amazing one that Gawn is actually doing on the 18th on Tuesday, which I'll be a part of as well, at the Danish Pavilion. Is that right? Yeah, so you'll hear about that as well. But let's get it kicked off. Let me go back here. And we're going to hear from our good friend. We're really excited when we reached out to the State of CDR report when this initiative was underdeveloped. We said, we need a source of truth on where we are with CDR right now. And as the years go by, what is changing to possibly make it possible for us to reach this target? So we have Nico Fairbairn, who's the head of partnerships for the State of CDR, who is going to give us just a little bit, about 5 or 6 minutes, to kind of orient us a little bit about where we are vis-a-vis that goal. So everybody give Nico a round of applause. I'll go ahead and move the slides for you if that's okay.
Testing. Okay.
You're good.
Hi everyone, I'm Nico with State of CDR. For those who aren't familiar, State of Carbon Dioxide Removal is a multi-institutional collaborative dedicated to delivering clear, open, and up-to-date data on the state of carbon removal. Let's kick things off. I always like to ground this conversation in 3 findings from our report. So first is our analysis that projects that we'll need to remove between 7 and 9 billion tons of CO2 every year by 2050 in order to stay within Paris temperature targets. Secondly, our analysis finds that there remains a gap between the amount of CDR that has been proposed in national proposals like long-term strategies and NDCs and the amount of CDR that we think that we'll need based on models. And lastly, I like to ground this conversation in, we go back 2 slides, one more. Ground this conversation in the truth that an overall climate response should center and remain primarily focused on deep and rapid reductions in decarbon emissions. And the more we can decarbonize today, the less we have to rely on CDR tomorrow. So it's not an either or, but a both and we really need to focus on near-term scale-up of CDR. Thank you, next slide.
Yeah, you can go ahead and hit it too.
Can do. Okay, thank you, Chris. So secondly, to frame how much CDR is happening today, I like to start by describing the difference between the conventional and novel buckets, which hopefully many in the audience are familiar today. Conventional CDR refers to afforestation and reforestation, as well as soil organic carbon sequestration and ecosystem restoration. The vast majority of CDR that's happening today can be attributed to conventional CDR alone. That's about 2.1 gigatons annually is removed through conventional CDR, or 99% of CDR overall. A much lesser extent of CDR is delivered through novel methods encompassing virtually all other kinds of CDR that you might think of, everything from biochar to direct air capture and bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. And to dive into a little bit more nuance about how much carbon removal is being delivered today, you can see in this graph how deliveries have changed since 2021 to 2024. We estimate that in 2024, about 1.5 million tons of CO2 was removed through novel methods. And the other key takeaway, as you can see in this graph, is that the vast majority of that novel CDR has been delivered historically through biochar and bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. And this says nothing, I might add, about the amount of purchases that have been made or carbon credits. This is simply a reflection of gross removals. So next, I want to transition to talking a little bit about contextualizing some of the 2030 targets that have been announced at COP30. So I think Chris will talk about those in a moment, but to remind folks, it's a target of 100 million tons of CO2 by 2030 and 3 gigatons of CDR, conventional CDR by 2030. So looking at previous analyses of how much novel CDR was expected to be delivered by 2030, previous analyses found that it would be somewhere between 80 million tons and 118 megatons of CDR delivered exclusively through DACs and BECCS by 2030. Now I want to caution that those figures, the 118 figure, the upper bound, is based on company announcements and based on 2023 data. And the 80 megaton figure is based on DACs and BECCS data alone from the CCUS project database from the IEA. So these are likely high estimates, but it does help to contextualize that 100 megaton target that has been announced, which would fall somewhere in between this range. So next, I also want to talk about the rate of growth that would be necessary in order for us to achieve our near-term 2030 targets. We conducted an analysis that compared this rate of growth to the rate at which other technologies have historically scaled. And the inherent rate of growth, if you take 2023 data and try and scale CDR to levels that are commensurate with 100 megatons of novel CDR by 2030, we find an inherent rate of growth of about 86%, and it turns out that that is faster than the vast majority of other technologies in our data set. So across 181 other technologies, only 2 scaled faster than 86%, and those were lithium-ion battery storage and internet traffic. If we take 2024 data and then try and scale that to 2030 targets, the rate of growth is actually even steeper. So I hope that this underscores the urgency and the magnitude of the challenge in order for us to keep CDR on track to meet Paris temperature targets. Lastly, before I turn it over, I just wanted to close with some high-level needs for the sector that policy can address. First, that innovative activity must intensify. So that's research and development and demonstration and funding and policy to support RD&D. And as well, of course, we need to see more demand for carbon removal, so we need more market-shaping mechanisms and policies to help create markets for CDR. And lastly, monitoring, reporting, and verification remains a persistent barrier across many CDR technologies, so we need to see more harmonization and proliferation of protocols in order to create the trust infrastructure that can underpin a reliable and real CDR ecosystem. So with that, I will close. Thank you, Chris.
I know Nico very generously. You have time, like literally 60 seconds for one question. Yeah, go ahead. Grab that mic there.
There is a difference between the IPCC analysis for how much gigatons we would need to 2050 and your latest analysis. And I just was curious to know if you can share about maybe the differences in data, or how did you kind of analyze it, and what is the cause of this?
I'll actually get into that right now in terms of what what that target is anchored in.
Thank you.
Just a second. Well, Nico has to run to another very cool event on CDR and construction materials, I believe, which is certainly a subject near and dear to my heart. You'll hear about that on our first panel. Nico, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll catch you later. I'll see you on Monday, actually. Okay, thanks. Round of applause for Nico. All right, so as I said, thanks, brother. What I will do, I think everybody who's a CDR person, you can look up State of CDR report, the second edition. Came out last year. They're working on a third one. Very, very valuable, indispensable resource for our sector. All right. So what I want to do is not go into extreme length, because the structure of this is actually quite simple in terms of what the Mutirão for carbon removals is. Okay. And what I want to just first set up is, again, What is exciting about it is that it's actually part of the action agenda of the COP. So every COP, for those of you who are veterans of COP or COP followers, there's sort of two major components of it. There's the negotiated part, or the negotiated outcomes. These were parties to the Paris Agreement and even Kyoto. There's actually, most of it's focused around the Paris Agreement. They come together and there'll be particular areas of implementation of the Paris Agreement that they will be negotiating. This is a diplomatic effort, and that's happening. And then the other part is the action agenda, and these are non-state actors and state actors working together, where they come together and major other initiatives that are really indispensable to the achievement of the Paris Agreement will be discussed, announced, worked through. So these work both together in parallel. Now, over the particularly last year in Azerbaijan, there were some important negotiated outcomes for CDR related to Article 6, but there really hasn't been, and I've gone to most of the last COPs over the last 5 years except for one, and the first one I went to in Glasgow, there was nothing about carbon dioxide removal. It was like, it wasn't mentioned. There was a castle 15 miles outside of Glasgow where a bunch of us got together and said, how do we get inside? And every year we've seen progress, which is both a measure of our own growth as a sector and maturation, and where we are sort of, what we are becoming in the real world. So there's been sort of step changes that have happened each year. But as I mentioned, this is the first one where in the action agenda, under the umbrella of the Brazilian presidency, there are actually initiatives that have been incubated through that process and are actually published initiatives under the action agenda itself. And here today, we're going to kind of, again, dive into one of them a little bit more closely. And as I mentioned at the top, this initiative is almost directly inspired by those two key themes I mentioned that really the whole COP30 sort of is premised on, and that is implementation over the next 3 to 5 years and working together to learn and do things that we couldn't do as single actors. And so to give you a sense of the actual architecture of the action agenda, there's 6 what they're called axes, and these are major groupings of different interventions that are really required per the Paris Agreement. So you see the first one there, a big one, energy, industry, transport. Then there's a nature, forests, and oceans, transforming agriculture. You can see, and then the bottom one there are these sort of cross-cutting related to carbon markets, carbon accounting, carbon finance. I was very active in that one as well. Now within each of these axes, there are 30 key objectives that are more specific goals that we actually want to be able to achieve within 3 to 5 years. And each one of those key objectives had what was called a activation group, which consisted of a secretariat and anywhere between 10 to 30 organizations and initiatives, anything from international governance organizations, industry groups, civil society. They came together and they worked on, well, what are some specific initiatives or impacts that we can actually formulate here through the COP and announce at the actual COP within these different groups. And as I mentioned before, CDR has popped up for the first time in such a structure. This is kind of a novel structure, but every COP has had, initiatives and announcements and objectives. And the 2 areas where COP has popped up is in that number 2, which you can see highlighted green. This is basically the decarbonization of difficult to abate sectors. That's where this one is, although it actually has a broader scope, but that's where we kind of got purchased and developed it. And then the other one is in land restoration and sustainable agriculture, and that is launching actually today over at the COP presidency. I have one of my partners might even be here for that. Very exciting. If you're a biochar, ERW, or soil organic carbon person, it's a new Brazil, India, and Kenya-led coalition to accelerate the rate at which those pathways had a huge amount of help from my buddy Asativa here in the front row in accelerating the rate at which methodological approval for those is reached so they can really be a part of global compliance with carbon markets. I might say another word about that at the end. But for this, which you see listed here, but focusing again on the Carbon Removals Mutirão, the main parts of this, again, as I said, to kind of map onto those 2 major themes, is that as we know in CDR, we kind of live or die when we talk to policymakers on the IPCC assessment reports that say very clearly, since back in 2018, we got to do a lot of this stuff if we have any hope of keeping 1.5, and we also need it for 2 degrees Celsius change. So we've known that for a really long time. But those are scientific projections, and they start in 2050 in terms of the estimates, and then 2100. So these big numbers, 10 gigatons, there's other estimates that are 5 gigatons, but huge amounts that we're talking. And what we thought we really need, as anybody who runs a CDR business or really cares about CDR, if you're talking to policymakers, you're trying to make change, and you're talking about 2050, that'll sink in a bit. But in order to have any chance of getting to that target, there's so much stuff we have to do right now. The next 3 to 5 years matter enormously. So we have to be setting implementation targets for that. And the other part is the Mutirão part. Okay, there's an enormous amount of collaboration within our sector. For people who are new to CDR, it's not a sector, it's many sectors that map onto dramatically different sectors and economies, and they work fundamentally different in terms of their engineering, their impact. But the amount of mobilization that has happened within our multi-sector CDR world is enormous. But we need to have more collaboration among those domains where, if we are to scale, there needs to be more conversation between governments. There needs to be more learning between corporations that have net zero targets and they know, I kind of have to do CDR. There needs to be more collaboration among industries that can actually do CDR. They need to learn from each other. So we're not just acting alone. And we know this from so many examples on both the small and high levels, that when people come together and leaders and new entrants can learn from each other and set a shared sense of ambition, and in practical terms learn what their options are, that accelerates things. So that's the real framework of this initiative. Now, in terms of where this come, the question that was just asked before about where do we get these targets? The targets that we're operating with are basically, if we think of highly durable or 1,000-year plus durability CDR, we're shooting for 100 million tons, at least committed, by 2030. We have a kind of an internal goal of maybe 30 delivered. We can track that over time. And then 3 billion of what is typically called nature-based. Here we say less than 1,000, but practically speaking, we're talking about things that might have less than 100. But there's innovation in those areas as well that we might be able to expand the durability to higher levels. Now, where do we come up with these targets? One of the things we wanted to really avoid is just to produce a target out of thin air. And the fact of the matter is over the last 3 years, there have been targets that have been issued from pretty high places that already have prestige. Back in COP 27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, the high-level climate champion at that time, Nigel Topic from the UK, put forward a target that was 3.5 gigatons by 2030, 3.5 billion tons, of which 500 of those 500 million tons had to be at least 100 years of durability. At the same time, and these were very conjoined, the Energy Transitions Commission, which is this enormous effort of industries, government representative, academic experts, had a very similar target. They were basically quite similar. And then the Clean Energy Ministerial, which is a group of energy and environmental ministries that work together, working with Mission Innovation, earlier in the decade came out with their target, which they have both a carbon management one and a carbon removal one. And the carbon removal one is 100 million of highly durable. So that's where we got that one from. And that has multiple countries. I believe there's 12 countries that are already a part of that. So we wanted to kind of do a mashup of those so that it was grounded at least in things that are out there in the real world. Now, we know this is really, really hard. And we also, when we brought the state of CDR into this, they sort of looked at, where does this sort of track where we are? And we're like, this is hard. This is hard to do. And this is not a declaration where everybody is agreeing and they're signing their life away to it, but we want to have an ambitious target. We think it's important to have a target that maps onto where do we actually really have to be based on the science by 2030 in order to be on that trajectory of getting to 7 to 10 gigatons, okay? So we wanted to create that as an anchor. The other part that we wanted to do is to, as I said before, the Mutirão part, the collaborations. Can we convene spaces where more advanced actors and newer actors can come together and in a structured way between now and the next COP and the next COP, learn from each other and develop a sense of this is how I do it, and then we get to the midway between COPs at London Climate Week, see if through those learnings and discussions, which will have many civil society groups participating to help guide, you'll hear from some of them shortly, can we get to a point midway between COPs where are there new announcements that are ready, whether they're policies or this many companies have decided to incorporate CDR into their net zero targets or major purchases, so that as we get to COP 31, and we're doing this every year, 32, 33, 34, and then we get to 35, where we can get more announcements that are actually part of the action agenda. And what we're really excited is the voluntary CDR demand generation is going to be led by the world, by WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Their membership of corporations, I think, is 17% of world GDP. We're talking about enormous companies. So if they're able to bring them into the fold, and then working with an amazing report that came out with the called the, you'll hear our guest for the second panel come on for a second, the Removals Guide to CDR is a guidebook for companies about how do you actually do it? What does it mean to incorporate it? And that will be part of the curriculum, actually, of that forum. The government policy one, how many people here, you'll meet Frederick in a second, how many people here know what the Group of Negative Emitters is? By show of hands. Okay. It's my personal job, among with many others, is that every single person in CDR world and beyond that knows what the Group of Negative Emitters is and gives it as much support as possible. It's a group of, what are we up to now, Frederick? How many nations? Okay, we're up to 8 nations back in COP 28, came together and with a declaration started by the Denmark, Finland, and Panama, and now it's grown, to start to change the conversation from net zero to net negative. So it's kind of a caucus that's developing in support of CDR. And so under their rubric, with help from the CEM, with Carbon Gap, and other, the Negative Emissions Pavilion, we can help countries that are new to their CDR policies learn what their options are, and to also learn from the companies or the countries that are further ahead in terms of actually pioneering this. So very, very excited about that. And for the industrial integration piece, we have many interested parties. We don't have an apex organization. That will probably be solved hopefully before the end of the year. But this is to help different industries, again, if you're in concrete, if you're in mining, if you're in agriculture, any area, wastewater treatment, to learn about what their options are for actually doing carbon dioxide removal, to not just be the ones that pay the bill for the carbon dioxide removal, but actually implementing it, which is an enormously important development. And one last thing I will say on this is that it's these pieces, but the more than the sum of the parts is getting CDR finally at the adult table at COP, making this the first year that it's a foregone conclusion that it will always be part of the action agenda, that there will always be an expectation that it will increasingly be part of net zero. We're no longer on the outside, but we're always on the inside, and that is really the kind of meta goal of this initiative. So that's what it is. There's a lot more details to it, as you can imagine. What we want to do today, as I said, is to dig into some of those pieces that we mentioned, and we're going to go ahead and start. And if I can have Kara, is Kara Maizano? Kara, do you have the questions on your phone? Because what I'm realizing now, I can't be looking at my. Did you have the questions on the phone? If you mind if I can look at your phone when I ask, because I can't look at my screen. I'm sort of old that way. I know what to ask you anyway, but it's helpful just so I don't give you guys a surprise. But we're going to start on this, what I think is really a new paradigm, and luckily our friend Kara Maizano, it's okay, I got it here, don't worry about it, I'll solve it between the next panels. Oh no, first I gotta get Frederick up here, sorry, come here, you come up here first. So what I want to do, as I said before, one of the real heroes in this is the Danish government, which was really a driving force behind the Group of Negative Emitters. I've gotten to know Frederick, and I've gotten to know his very small team that do this sort of on the side of the real job. And that's the way it is. It's human beings that are putting these things together. And over the last several months, I've gotten to know the GONE team quite well into what their vision is and how they want to grow. And again, I'm really excited that they're having their own event on the 18th. It's going to be about gone, but I'm going to allow Frederick right now to introduce himself, tell you more about that event, and then I know he's got to run to something else. Let's see if that microphone works.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, and thanks first and foremost for having me here, and congratulations on to everyone involved on this. It's great to see also from our perspective CDR getting more and more prominent role here at the COPs as well. So I want to start by my name is Frederick Haag. I'm a head of section in the Danish Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities, where amongst other things I'm responsible co-leading our work with the Group of Negative Emitters. So first of all, the motivation for the Danish government to establish this group was based on the obvious findings of the IPCC and others, that we need to talk about CDR, and we need to scale it, and we need to talk about it in parallel with, of course, also talking about avoidance and drastic emission reductions. On the other hand, also based on this, the Danish government in 2022 set forward the target of net zero emissions to 2045 and 110% emissions reductions in 2050, having 10% net negative emissions. And this is all very new to a lot of governments. Based on that, and also in the Danish Climate Act, it's a part that because Denmark is accountable for a fairly small amount of global emissions, we need to use our experiences and our learnings to actually go out globally and try to do what we can. So based on this, we established at COP28, as Chris said, the Group of Negative Emitters. First and foremost, we wanted to gather national governments to advocate for the need for CDR. A lot of countries were and are, and more are, doing a lot of good things in this space, but we need to coordinate, we need to talk together, and we need to learn more, because it is still, especially for governments, everything is very new. So we established it with Finland having a negative emission target themselves, and Panama having negative emissions based on their nature-based solutions. And we expanded with 5 countries at COP29, so we're now 8 countries. We're very broadly represented, both African, South American, Central American and European countries. And we're working to also broaden this with more countries, more national governments, but also in the multi-level. So we also want to include some national governments. Cities can do a lot, states can do a lot, also in countries where we maybe on national level won't be able to integrate them in our work. So this is something we're working to do from our government level, is to gather people, to coordinate, and also create a platform where we can include the experts, people like you, people like a lot of you here. We can include the private sector. We can start to create transparency and coordination. A lot of the things Nico also talked about earlier. I think it's important for a lot of national governments to also be part of that discussion and to learn and also be able to share the points we come from. So I'm very happy that we've been working so closely together also on this plan to accelerate. Ghana has been very involved. We've been very involved with you, Chris.
Great.
We'll be very happy to also play our part in the policy forum part of the plan to accelerate. And I don't want to say much more. I mean, as you mentioned, we have an event on the 18th at the Danish Pavilion. We'll have at least confirmed now 5 ministers in the first panel, all talking about their targets, how to reach negative emissions, what to do. And we'll also follow that up with some of the experts. We will have you there, we'll have Nico there, we'll have Sherwood there. So I mean, it will be really good, I think, serve as a condensed version of what we're trying to do, to have this platform where we can all talk together and also get the national and subnational governments involved. And through that, hopefully also get it even higher up. I mean, talk about the negotiation space, how to, from the action agenda, which has been such a key focus for the Brazilian presidency, to also be able to push from the outside for this need for CDR, to demystify it and help create.
What time again on Tuesday?
15:30, the Danish Pavilion. It will also be a live stream from the guys here at CDR 30. But I mean, we hope to see as many of you there as possible. I think it'd be good. There'll also be an announcement, maybe something with some sub-nationals. I'll leave that as a cliffhanger.
Yeah, and let me just say one thing too. In order for a initiative, what they're called plans to accelerate solution in the sort of vocabulary of COP30, in order for those to have happened, they had to be nominated by an initiative within an activation group. These guys nominated it, and then it was supported by WBCSD and the Carbon Management Challenge. But this would not have happened unless I reached out to them. Tiny amount of bandwidth, you're in negotiations, you're running around, and they said, yep, we're going to do it, and they introduced it. So please give Frederick a big round of applause and keep following us. Thanks, buddy, appreciate it. All right, now when we get on to our first panel, which has some buddies of mine. Come on up, guys. All right, we got Olivier, Tom, and Andrew from GCCA. Are you here? I know we have maybe a potential late joiner. No worries if not. Come on up, Liam. Great. Does everybody have a microphone? Does everybody have a water? Oh, we need another chair? Okay, great. Oh, yeah. Sorry, one more. We'll grab one for you. Okay. Great. All right. So I'm going to set this one up a little bit. And this, so Kara on the other end of the stage has also been incredibly helpful in all of the COP CDR stuff I've been doing. Has not failed me, has supported me in so many ways. But she's really one of the real intellectual architects of this whole paradigm, or at least making, thank you very much, identifying this as a critical way for CDR to scale, which is CDR is an embeddable enterprise. When we look to do CDR, it's not another separate planet that just has to be done. It's something that can live within existing industries in ways that not only allow for CDR, but add value to those industries itself. And so what our goal is today is to really dig into that, not only with Kara providing a little bit of a framework for us based on an amazing paper that she was the lead author of back in April, which we'll talk a little bit about, but then to hear from a few awesome companies that are, you know, the living examples of companies within existing industries that are advancing CDR. So I'm really excited for that. So let's do quick introductions first. You can just say, you know, who you are and where you're coming from, and then we'll get into the questions. And Tom, we're going to go ahead and start down there with you, bud. On the bottom here.
Okay.
Is the key thing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Tom Rawlson. I'm Policy and Partnerships Lead for Mission Zero Technologies. We're a direct air capture company based in the UK, but we're now international in terms of our deployment. So we have 3 in total, removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as we speak, 2 in the UK and 1 in Canada.
Thanks. I'm Cara Maizano. I'm a scientific and technical advisor to Chris and other organizations in CDR space. My background is in academic science actually. So before CDR, I was working in first particle physics and then environmental epidemiology. So it was a big jump to CDR, but I think it's allowed me to sort of connect dots and look at things from a different perspective. And so far that's served me well.
And what was the name of the paper that we're going to talk about a little bit?
Sorry. So in previously I was at RMI. RMI is an international think tank. They call themselves a think and do tank. They do quite a lot of work. And in April we released a report called Seizing the Industrial CDR Opportunity, and then that was followed with a smaller paper focused on CDR in the built environment aside from timber, but like bio-based building materials, and then one on carbon removal within the desalination industry. And then there's still more coming actually. There's one on mining. It'll be a longer roadmap, and then another paper on wastewater. So we've noticed that there's, it's not, I'll explain a bit more
Yeah, we'll get into it.
But we're just sort of summing up all the good work that everybody else is doing. So.
Absolutely. Olivier? Something you got to turn on and off here.
Does it work now? Yeah. Okay. I'm Olivier Reynaud, co-founder and managing director of Net Zero. We do biochar, mostly in Brazil, actually. We're also present in Cameroon, and we're a French company.
And the linkages, obviously, with coffee and sugarcane is a really, really, really exciting one. So we'll hear more about that. And Liam, who I just met, when was it? We were in Malmo, and I saw you give a presentation with Tony, who's in the audience. I was like, oh my god, I gotta work with this guy.
Hi all, I'm Liam Candy. I'm the VP for Carbon Solutions for Anglo American. We're a multinational mining company, and I guess the project that is happening in my team that's of interest to this audience is an ERW project that's got a huge amount of potential to scale.
Excellent, thank you, Liam. So what we're going to do is some of the just initial questions to kind of create a little bit of a scaffolding for us is we're going to hear a little bit from Kara just about the kind of the substance and findings of the paper that came out last April. And again, what's exciting about the paper is not just the constituent parts of it and the industries identified. Many of us in CDR were doing it, but thinking about it, about this whole idea of embedded CDR within industries. And that paper that Kara co-wrote for RMI back in April really kind of puts that forward as a thing, as a frame of reference. But I'm wondering, Kara, just sort of at a high level, if you can kind of give us a little bit more of a deeper level of what you introduced in your introduction.
Sure, yeah, thanks. So yeah, we, maybe I'll give a little bit of a background. So when I joined RMI, my job was to understand how we scale geochemical CDR. So that's all things having to do with rocks. And we realized quickly that you don't scale geochemical CDR without the mining industry. They need to be an integral component. And as we started looking into this, not just the mining industry, the steel industry also produces alkaline material that can be mineralized, as do other industries. But the more we looked into it, we're noticing, there are many, many industries that are applicable. They've got either applicable feedstocks or infrastructure or processes relevant to CDR. At the same time, as CDR innovation, technology providers, CDR startups are starting to build out their projects. I'll say some of the more interesting ones are the ones where they've partnered with existing industries. So there's some great examples, like Capture 6 does direct air capture in the desalination industry. CO280 has built out a project with pulp and paper. There's a long list of really, really interesting projects and synergies there. And we were thinking, we don't just need CDR startups to partner with, like these industries really need to be more of an integral part of the effort to scale CDR. And just given the vast amount of resources required to implement CDR in the first place, we really need more collaboration with heavy industry. There's a lot going on, like I said, and we've got some great examples here, but we need to really think about this a little bit differently. The other thing is that up till now, CDR has been supported through the voluntary carbon market. We all know that has limits, and then we look to compliance markets or government procurement, but there are many, many, many other ways to pay for CDR, and some of that involves having some of these heavy industries do that CDR themselves, and they can pass along the costs in many different ways. So we're kind of trying to shift the
paradigm.
The paradigm, I guess, from like, okay, heavy emitting company, you've emitted, now you need to buy carbon removal from someone else. You can do it yourself. There's a lot of ways that many industries can do it themselves, and we need to, we're going to need all the CDR we can get, I guess, to reach some of these big targets.
Yeah, it's a matter of kind of like hooking on to stable, existing, massive industries that know how to move big flows of material around, right? You had mentioned, Kara, just in the paper, and this will set us up nicely for our discussion, is, there's kind of multiple integration pathways that are really in the paper, like mineralization, waste valorization. Can you just identify and define the ones that are in the paper in terms of how you split that up, and then
Too many.
We can go right into it. Maybe we'll give the examples by actually talking through it.
These are some great examples, yeah. But one thing I will say is that the range of CDR approaches that are applicable to heavy industry is the same range of CDR approaches that exist today. It's not just a subset, it's really all of them in multiple different ways. The other thing is there are multiple ways to integrate. I mean, you can choose an industry like wastewater.
Yeah.
But there are geochemical methods that are applicable. There are biological methods that are applicable. You can do CCS on the when things are incinerated. There's a number of different ways to do that. It's not just one single way. Mining, for example, you can do many different types of CDR on a mine site. It's not just with rocks. There's a lot. Mine sites have quite a lot to offer in terms of doing CDR.
Let's get right into that. It's actually kind of my first question. And so you'll see here today we have representation. With biochar, you'll hear from Olivier the integration with coffee and sugarcane. Concrete, the one that anybody who knows me for 5 seconds knows that is my obsession about storing carbon in concrete. And then mining, but there's so many other ones. Wastewater treatment, asphalt, there's an enormous amount of them. But let's look first, as Kara said, the mining industry, one of the legacy industries of legacy industries, right? That the world really just depended on materially in fundamental ways. And there are multiple ways to do CDR that integrate with mining, but the waste stream element of it, when some of the waste products that come out of mine or the materials that are directly mined by the mining industry are critically important to enhance rock weathering in particular. So Liam, Anglo-American, not a mop and pop shop. This is a sort of a storied global mining operation. I wonder if you could first just tell us what Anglo-American is, and then your play right now working with Tony from 0x on ERW.
Okay, I think what Anglo-American is, we're a big mining
A little
company.
closer to that.
We're a big mining company. Historically, we've been a company that's mined a lot of commodities, everything from diamonds to iron to copper to steel making coal. We are in kind of transition at the moment as a business. If everything goes according to the plan, we'll be merging with Teck Resources to become one of the world's largest copper miners. So the rest of you wanted the...
Well, in terms of now, I wish I had a picture of that ziggurat of magnesium.
Maybe
tell us about...
Yeah, just a little bit about this project. So
Yeah.
the project that we're working on is related to some of our historical nickel operations. So just to give the sort of highest level idea of what you do in this kind of nickel operation, you're pretty much mining what is a very old metal-rich soil. We mine that soil, we melt it, we tap the metals off, and then we recrystallize it as a glass. So you end up with this very magnesium-rich glass that weathers incredibly quickly, about 50 times faster than basalt. We produce huge volumes of it every year. We produce about 2.4 million tons of material a year. The CDR potential is about 0.6, 0.7 tons per ton. So that's enough to draw down 1.2 million tons of carbon per annum. For the next 50 years, we can supply material without running out. Right? And so, if you look at it, I think the big thing with working with a miner on something like this is if you look at the cost drivers for enhanced rock weathering, you've pretty much got your sourcing and moving material and then doing your MRV. Now, we think the MRV costs will come down quite quickly, but that the sourcing and moving material is something that you just can't escape. And so you really need high potential material that's close to a lot of agriculture, and that's where the opportunities are for feedstocks like ours.
And we'll pass the mic to Tony in a little bit, who's the MRV that was just mentioned has a very, incredibly interesting and robust MRV system for ERW. But if you just track the numbers there, this is one company with one project, what would you say, 1.6 million a year, potentially?
If you're applying 2 million tons to soil every year, which we could do for the next half century, that'd be about 1.2 million tons of CO2 that you would draw down. You'd probably claim a lot less, but you'd expect 1.2 million tons of removals.
Yeah, it's a lot. single company, single project. So over to Olivier, totally different feedstocks that we're talking about here. We're talking about coffee and sugarcane. You're one of the most a X Prize winning company for biochar. But I think it's the sort of the poster child for this idea of partnering with existing industries to create value out of that, both commercially and for climate. So tell us a little bit about how that all works.
Yeah. So maybe just as context first, so we have a strong focus upstream on crop residues, not so much on the forestry parts, at least not for now. And downstream we use the biochar for agriculture, so not for construction materials, sorry, not for now at least. So that's essentially what we do, and indeed we work today mostly with coffee and sugarcane. So the residues of coffee are the dehusking, the outer shell around the bean. And then on sugarcane you have centralized residues, which is the bagasse, the resulting of crushing the cane. And then you have the leaves that are left in the fields. So that's the kind of biomasses we can use. And our approach has been very much since the beginning to try to foster these partnerships in the value chains. Because we think that this is the fastest and most efficient way to scale biochar. And actually we've developed something that I think no other biochar company has today, which is a franchise model. So the idea is we have initially debugged the system by doing the sites ourselves. So we develop the technology, we build the sites, operate the sites, do the whole end-to-end process. And once we have a ready system that can be kind of plug and play for third parties, we franchise this whole system, technology plus services, to existing players in agro supply chains that have a lot of residues, have soils that could benefit from biochar, but are not biochar experts, they're not carbon experts, not technology experts. And so we're creating this package that can be a new brick in what they do, and we support them along the way. I'll take the example of what we're doing with Atvos in Brazil. It's the second largest biofuel producer in the country. And we've recently announced a partnership with them where we will be building a site literally inside their mill and will be using their residues to produce biochar that then will be used in their fields. And in sugarcane in particular, the volumes are enormous. Sugarcane is actually the largest crop in the world, and Brazil produces 38% of these volumes. So we're talking, very, very significant volumes. And so this franchise model is something where we think, it will accelerate growth because you're giving away something that is ready to produce and scale, but you don't need to finance yourself the capex, because otherwise this becomes the limiting factor. And you also provide a model that is very flexible, so initially you can have these players sell the credits as an offset to the market, and eventually, probably when you've scaled up, you have economies of scale, you have systems that are more efficient, you can turn to insetting, and this is eventually probably how these industries that are heavy emitters will reach net zero. Because agriculture in particular produces, a lot of greenhouse gases, especially from fertilizers. It's very difficult to remove completely fertilizers, and so that can be a solution.
Yeah, there's real value. I mean, one thing I should say, I missed it, which killed me, because I have more coffee running through my body now than blood. But there was actually, just again, this is a sign of not only the reality of the opportunity, but the maturation of CDR in general. Italy's actual delegation pavilion on the 9th had like a 3-hour coffee and CDR session that was there. And so I do think coffee deserves some props, at least in the agricultural space, for really being an earlier actor on that. So before we move on to the sort of CDR and products, we'll hear from Tom. I just want to check in with you, Kara, a little bit, just to cap off the waste valorization part there. There's the idea of circularity and waste streams. I just want to is there anything bigger we could say about why the waste valorization piece is so important as a hook for CDR, more generally?
So, obviously it depends on the industry, but many industries have to pay to have their waste taken away or processed. So if somebody can come along and do something with that, it's a big deal. The other thing is sometimes waste might be problematic, as they are in mining, where there's a lot that goes into just keeping them secure and safe. But even we're seeing, like in wastewater, for example, I think a lot of times the sort of bio slurry that's left over can get, sometimes it's used in agricultural settings, but more and more we're discovering like things like PFAS or plastics and stuff. So slowly, we're not going to want to spread this material on farms anymore. It's contaminated, so we need to find other ways to dispose of it. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot, like brines from desalination plant. You don't want to stick that back directly into seawater because it's problematic. If you can do something with it, you can store carbon in it. You can use it, to extract more. Yeah, there's a lot of different options, and ideally the carbon removal process, depending, saves money for the industry because of the way it's processed, or it allows an additional revenue stream to help cover those costs.
Yeah, and it's just, again, when we talk about integration, there's the integration with the industries themselves, but this is an example of an integration with another paradigm that's very well established, just the idea of circularity in general. You know what I mean? To be able to take that, give it a better use for it, reduces certain risks that come with it, and takes carbon out of the air. So you can start to see how the appeal and the logic actually for such integration be there.
Can I just add? In some cases, like for example the desalination case, sometimes the desalination company might not be that interested in carbon removal, but what we've been hearing is that they're interested because it produces more water for them. It helps them extract more water, so they get to sell more of what they're already selling.
Yeah.
And the carbon removal is a side benefit.
That's what we always, from a carbon removal centric way, talk about the other stuff as these co-benefits, as cherries at tops. But it's always best when the carbon removal is the co-benefit, when there's a compelling reason to do it for other reasons. And so now I gotta move over to Tom. We're gonna talk about the integration. It's a perfect example of an integration of carbon into products. And concrete is the mother of all products. It's the second most used material on Earth after water. It's an indispensable material. It's not going anywhere. And if you can start loading concrete up with carbon permanently, that is enormous. And I'll just give you one frame of reference. There was a paper you might even know better than me, Tom. It was either in Nature and Science from a professor at UC Berkeley, I believe. They estimated that the built environment, 16 gigatons a year could be stored in the built environment. Again, this is in Nature or Science, 13 of which was in concrete. So that is just an enormous upside. And none of the things we're talking about right now involve geological sequestration, which is mostly people's frame of reference when they think about big carbon removal. You can do big carbon removal without geological. So Mission Zero Technology has been following for a really, really long time. DAC company, getting into the concrete. Tell us about how that all works. Oh. Let's hand the mic down. There you go. We'll just do that.
Thank you. And I think actually Kara's framing of how we think sometimes about the co-benefits as a kind of like afterthought is a great framing, because we actually, when we talk to customers and we do customer discovery, we don't talk about carbon removals at all in the first instance. It's not something that a lot of our customers are particularly relevant or particularly interested in. It is a cherry on top. Exactly, that's the framing of how we put it. We are a company that is reimagining how we use CO2. Carbon is an incredibly useful product, and it will continue to be an incredibly useful product in the future. And it's just how we get it and how we use it that's important. So what we do is we remove carbon from the atmosphere, and we then have a way of producing it at a very high purity, which is important not actually as much for the CO2 pathway that we have with a building aggregates manufacturer. We produce carbon at sort of 98% purity, but they don't need it even that high. So what we do is we have been able to integrate our carbon removal directly into their existing facility in the UK. It's a pipeline that we created. It's a tiny pipeline, but it spans from our facility into their operations. It's now hooked up, and we are now removing carbon directly from the atmosphere, and we put it into what they take as a waste product, fly ash from energy to waste plants. We combine it with our CO2 and water, and we make a building aggregate. So we can use that for concrete blocks, pavements, cement, other cement uses, concrete uses, roads. And so it's something that we're doing now. And at the very end of that process, we talk about, and actually you can get this certified as a permanent removal storage credit.
It's as permanent as if you put it underground. And let's just talk about the aggregate part there and concrete. And then I have to geek out on this just for a second here to give a sense of the significance. The binding ingredient of concrete is Portland cement. This is one of the sort of just the classic difficult to abate sectors. It's about 8% of global emissions come from that. If you walk around COP and you participate in it, the framework for how we deal with the emissions from concrete are usually talked about. What do we have to do to cement? And so you get to things like carbon capture and sequestration and other things about, maybe using hydrogen at some point. What is not part of the discourse yet, which has to be, is what are the things you can do to the concrete later on down the line that can balance those emissions and empowers concrete producers. And you just use the word aggregate, where 80-90% of the mass of concrete is cement, is sand and gravel. That's the aggregate. If you're starting to make that stuff out of carbon, then you're talking about 80%, varies by mix, of this second most used material on Earth. So you're talking about really, really big numbers that can actually happen.
And actually, I could say that this is one example of using CO2 for CO2 mineralization. You can use it for CO2. You can use it for cement curing.
Yeah.
You can use it with supplementary cementatious materials. So you can use the CO2 in that regard to replace Portland cement, or in the production of Portland cement, replace the clinker or reduce some of the emissions through the clinker production. So there's a variety of other ways that you can inject carbon as a permanent source of storage throughout the cement into concrete value chain, and you'll be seeing storage potential through each of those stages.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so fascinating. Tony, I'm going to ask if you want to sit up here, because you're probably going to get the mic in a second if you have a minute. So let's move on to the all-important subject of MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification. Anybody who spends any time in carbon removal knows that this is really the core, because this is where did it happen, and do we know that the benefits of it are going to persist? One of the amazing sort of promise of carbon dioxide removal is the diversity of different ways of doing carbon removal. One of the things that's complicated about, though, is because they're all fundamentally different. Whether you're taking organic feedstocks and turning it into biochar, or you're taking mineral residue and you're using it for ARW, or you're putting, mineralizing an aggregate, the way in which you have to monitor, report, and verify are also quite different. And so what our key priority in this 3 to 5 years is that we have absolute lockdown on the MRV, because that's how you participate in compliance markets, that's how we know it happened. So I did want to go through a little bit on each side about describing the MRV to the extent that problems are solved, and what are some of the problems that exist. So let's go ahead and go in reverse order, actually. And Tom, to me, it looks like a relative, that's one of the big benefits of direct air capture, is it's quite countable in terms of MRV, particularly when you're not doing geostorage and you're actually putting it in a product. Like, the measurement seems relatively straightforward, but I might be wrong. Let me know about that.
No, you're right. We've done some initial testing at our facility in the UK that it is feeding into the building aggregates plant, and it does seem to be a very robust and actually quantifiable process. I was chatting with Lucas May from Isometric yesterday, and he was saying that one of the advantages of DAC is that because you're sort of seeing the CO2 come from the air and it being released, you could probably clear a carbon credit hourly based on just you being able to monitor how much CO2 is flowing. And we do that remotely from our plant. We have guys in our office who are sort of working on the monitoring and sensor systems that we have, so we can sort of account for the carbon as it's being actively removed out in Wrexham, which is in the east of the UK, from where our
Wrexham.
Yeah.
At Wrexham?
No, it's a different. It's Wrexham.
Okay.
But we'll have to do maybe a Netflix series on that plant as well. Just as fascinating. So I think, yeah, you're right. It's actually very quantifiable, and we can do it at a sort of an hourly basis. It's then when it's put into the building aggregate that you need to get that pathway. What's actually quite cool is we directly inject the CO2, but once it's curing outside in an enormous warehouse, it absorbs even more CO2 afterwards. So that's not our CO2. That's atmospheric CO2 that's being absorbed at another rate. It's just part of the curing process. So
cement does that naturally.
Yeah, we need to kind of account for that too, but the process for us to account for it initially is relatively straightforward, I understand.
Cool. So we're going to go through the specific, and then I'll have you again, Kara, cap off if there's any more general things to be stated on it. But Olivier, again, these are all complicated things, but in terms of how net zero is sort of grappling with the MRV challenge, or maybe it's not as much of a challenge as it used to be.
Is it working?
Every pavilion has this,
No, it is definitely a challenge, and I think it's, by the way, an underestimated challenge, especially for biochar, and especially if we're talking about integrating biochar in existing activities. I'd like to expand a little bit your question, staying on the MRV, but slightly broadly, more broadly, the topic of compliance. Agro supply chains are subject to a lot of compliance rules that some of them overlap with the methodologies of certification for carbon, but they also have a lot of things related to ESG practices, traceability and so on that goes beyond the carbon aspects. And so if you want to work with existing agro players, you actually need to meet their requirements. And it's not necessarily very easy. So for example, we work with Nespresso. They have very, very high standards in terms of ESG compliance. And so, it's not just building an MRV system, it's building a compliance system that will meet, the standards of these agro players, because if you don't meet them, you can't work with them. And so that can be on supply chain, can be also on operations.
Let me pause on that. That's very interesting too, to also think of the standards of those industries for ESG, kind of keep the carbon removal suppliers sort of honest or at a high bar as well. That's not even a benefit that I thought previously. Yeah. Very interesting.
But now, more specifically on the narrower definition of MRV, I think the big challenge for biochar in particular, but probably for other technologies, is if you're working with existing players, you'll need to use part of their data. And so you have a huge data challenge where you'll need to have your own systems integrate with their systems. Nothing is standardized. And so you need extremely flexible tech stacks. I think this is very underappreciated in the sector. We've put a lot of effort in developing that. We're of course still doing it. But if we don't have something that can integrate with other systems, it's going to be a huge challenge. And at the same time, so there's this huge variability between players, and at the same time we need standardization. And we need standardization in how we process the data, but also on the production side, the equipment, we need to make sure that all the equipment meets the same standards today, despite having very high bars already in the certification standards. There's not a lot of homogeneity in terms of practices. And the reliability of the data is sometimes very questionable, actually. There's a lot of data acquisition that is done manually, even in the process side where you could be putting some sensors. And so there's a challenge of raising the bar, standardizing, and at the same time having very flexible systems that can integrate with the existing data of the upstream and downstream operations that are managed and that will continue to be managed by the existing agro players. And so we're putting a lot of effort in that. It's the very beginning, and I think this should be more on the table in CDR discussions, especially for biochar.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And so we're kind of going, it's all hard. We're going sort of up a curve here for maybe some of the more straightforward MRV. to kind of a middle tier one. And when I say this, I don't say that we can't do it. We will do it. I think you guys have an amazing way of doing it. But there's certain CDR pathways, ERW, ocean alkalinity enhancement, by the nature of mineralization and their distributedness, they're quite challenging. But that's provoking an enormous amount of creativity and innovation in it. And I think having met you and Tony, come here, I'm gonna have you sit up here, who's Anglo American's ERW partner. Tell us a little bit about the challenges of the ERW, and then we don't have the image, but the unique way in which you're approaching that. And introduce yourself, Tony.
Sure. Yeah, okay, so obviously ERW MRV is really complicated. And one of the plus sides we've got on our project is because our material weathers so quickly, we actually have the opportunity to do aqueous phase measurements. So with ERW, you can either use soils or waters as your primary measurement. And the temptation is to use soils because they're easier, but really if you want to guarantee your carbon drawdown, kind of your highest confidence is in that aqueous measurement. We started the project doing the MRV ourselves, using lysimeters. It's complicated and difficult, and kind of when we started looking for a partner who had solutions to this, I think that's when we met the 0x team and the neat solution they have for aqueous phase.
Yes, thanks for the introduction, and Tony from 0x. Maybe I start a step back looking at the general problem of MRV and enhanced weathering. When I started in carbon removal and got in touch with developers from other pathways and we were talking about MRV, I just realized that for everybody else it's kind of this little step at the end of the process where you actually get the credit after you invested years in building a facility that actually does the carbon removing. For us, MRV is essentially pretty much what we do, because the beauty of ERW is that I'm working with existing infrastructure. I work with material that's there, I can spread it on fields that are already there using machinery that the farmer already owns. But the issue is that in contrast to direct air capture, and we are very envious of the easiness of MRV in your sector, I'm working in an open system which is soil. I can walk from one side of the field to the next, and I'm switching from loam to sand, which means the weathering kinetics will be completely different, and I have to resolve this variability to actually get the signal. And this means that in the end, MRV in our sector should be viewed as an investment to really capture as much data as possible in the very beginning, with the highest degree of accuracy, to really know what you're dealing with to create a basis to scale. And talking about aqueous measurements and the general approach for optimization, I think this has two components. On the one hand, this is purely technology. So our company, 0x, is working on a novel aqueous-based sampler. Without going too deep into the science, you can imagine it currently, you're taking lysimeters that suck water out of the soil. You take a sample every 2 weeks, you pay the laboratory every 2 weeks, you pay your field staff to actually remove the sample, so you rack up costs pretty quickly, which means you can't really have a high measurement density. What we do is the direct opposite. We put a sampler in the field that continuously filters out what we want to measure. So we put it in, wait a year, come back, take it out, and what we get is a very easy time-integrated signal that allows us to do one thing, put in factor 80 more sensors than isometric wants us to, which then in the second step helps us optimize. Away from the sensors to why I think partnering with industry is important. Aside from the fact that this allows us to essentially double down on what we do best, doing the MRV and not reinventing a part of the value chain that Anglo kind of perfectionist over the last century, probably. The big benefit is that you can optimize MRV by working at scale. Because we're not only talking about measurements in the sense of proving how much carbon we remove, but learnings on which fields work great, which combination of which rock, which crop type, which soil gives us the fastest weathering rates, the most carbon, the highest resolvability. And if you can leverage the scale that Anglo-American provides, this means that your data set will be significantly larger. And significantly larger means that at some point you don't need to double the amount of measurements if you double the size of your project. Because your goal is to capture the variability of a certain region, and at some point you kind of play through all the combinations. So I think in the end these partnerships are what needed in ERW to actually get to scale and get the costs down, because that's what we need.
Thank you, Tony. Here, I'll sit over here. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things, and I was a solar guy for 15 years before I started CDR, and the number of insurmountable, we can't do this, it'll never happen. Cheapest form of electricity right now in the world, fastest growing for, I don't know, the last 10 years or so. And what I like when those challenges happen, the response is they get solved in new ways, and sometimes other co-benefits of that solution kind of comes out. So if I was a betting man, I would put my money that we're going to figure that part out. So let's just wrap it up here right now when we get into our next panel. In keeping in sort of the theme of the CDR Mutirão, focused on 2030, it'd be great to just hear quickly, like, what are your own targets as a company for your solutions by 2030? We'll start with Tom. And Kara, if you want to jump in there with a feasibility or say something smart, go for it. There we go.
That was right.
Yeah.
Sorry for the loud. We have a company goal of 100 megatons deployed or under contract, by 2028. So we're looking at sort of megatons. No, I think it's kilotons. 100 kilotons. Wow, that's like
yeah, we're good.
Sorry, we would have sold the whole thing after we were on. 100,000 tons by 2028. That's globally, so we actually see ourselves as very much a UK-based company, and credit to the UK government for giving us some really catalytic innovation funding. But we're now deployed in Canada. I think that we will look at where it makes the most sense with policy, with incentives, with the business case, and with partners for where to deploy around the world. We're pretty agnostic in terms of geography, so hitting that target and hitting it wherever we can is our company focus.
Excellent.
So in our case, we're aiming for 1 to 2 million tons of CO2 removal capacity installed by end of 2030. The speed will depend a lot on funding and on how quickly players from particular agro supply chains, but maybe also other players, in the funding space, are ready to take risk, because this is still a nascent industry, and so in the end the limiting factor is not going to be the technology or the willingness of people, it's going to be funding, and so the more funding we'll have, the faster we'll go.
Absolutely. Liam?
I mean, for Anglo-American, our group targets really center on 2040, but from a carbon mitigation point of view, we're very much for compensation. We very much think of it as a portfolio. For this particular project, by 2030, we're hoping to be deploying between 500,000 and 1 million tons of material per annum.
So these are 3 companies, so we will have their backs on this, but there's many other companies as well. And if you look at it from the point of view up here, again, solar, the most breathless booster of solar, where we are right now is solar, just blew past those expectations about 20 years early, both on price and scale. We can do this, and it's not going to come from those top-level estimates, it's going to come from these guys and their peers in the field. So join me in giving a big round of applause for these amazing innovators. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Stay cool. All right. So we will go right into it. At some point, I will take a break. I'm watered up, but when you drink water, there's 2 ends of that. So I might have to take a 5-minute break at one point. But I'm feeling pretty good right now. And Johan, how you doing? All set? All right. So we have a little, that's right. Those are better. So this, if you hold the mic on the bottom and just kind of hold it close to